The moment the warp swelled like a womb, I knew we were already dead. I did not say it aloud, of course. On an Imperial void ship, you learn early that certain thoughts must never be given the dignity of sound. Instead, I stood at my station in the navigator's antechamber, hands clasped behind my back, pretending I did not feel the wrongness trembling through the decks of the Glory of Dawn, like a heartbeat trying to escape a corpse. The air tasted of incense and cold metal, ozone from the Geller field, generators seeped through the vents, sharp and chemical, chasing the sour tang of old fear and recycled breath. Somewhere beyond the bulkhead, the ship's choir chanted litanies into vox ducts, their thin voices smearing together into a faint background murmur. Sanctified words fed into sacred machines, holding back an ocean of madness, or so we like to believe. "Ilan," Lyra said quietly beside me, "you've gone pale again." I turned my head toward her. Sergeant Lyra, Morn Voidborn, Kaskin-trained, stormtrooper assigned as my guardian, armor scuffed, helmet mag locked at her hip, dark hair tied back with the careless precision of someone who did everything for function, not charm. The lumen strips overhead carved shadows across the scars at the corner of her mouth. "I'm always pale," I murmured. "It's the warp. It doesn't favor a healthy complexion." She snorted once, no real smile, but the ghost of one. "You weren't this pale yesterday." Yesterday, before the pulse. I glanced at the navigator's sealed door, adamantium and warded gold, studded with purity seals and prayer scrolls, all humming softly as the warp veins beyond strained against unseen currents. Behind that door sat Lady Navigator Cerise Calvian, third eye, open to the storm no sane man could endure. The first pulse had hit 8 hours ago. The lights had flickered. The Geller field had surged. Somewhere deep in the hull, something had knocked. A sound that was not sound, felt rather than heard. Half the astropaths had vomited blood. One had laughed until his jaw dislocated. We had called it turbulence. We had lied to ourselves, with practiced ease. Now, another tremor rippled underfoot. Subtle, wrong. The lumen strips dimmed for a heartbeat, then overcompensated, flaring too bright before settling into a sickly glow. Lyra's hand drifted toward the holstered pistol at her thigh, fingers tapping the grip in a rhythm I'd come to recognize as her own private litany. "That wasn't on the nav chart, was it?" "Warp currents shift," I said. "Eddies form. Storms twist. The charts are guidance, not law." "You didn't answer my question." "No," I admitted. "It wasn't there." The Vox cherub above the navigator's door twitched, its little brass wings chattering as its optics flared with runes only I was trained to read. The glyphs flickered frantic red before stabilizing to a steady, ominous amber field. "Stress," I said quietly. "The Geller envelope is deforming." "Deforming how?" Lyra asked. "Like something is pressing against it from the other side." She didn't swear. She had done that the first year we served together. By the third, she had learned that profanity adds nothing in the face of an infinite hungry seer. A thin wail sounded through the bulkhead metal, vibrating as the ship's bones adjusted under some intangible pressure. The smell of hot oil seeped into the antechamber, mingling with incense until it made my throat ache. Lyra stepped closer, shoulder brushing mine. It was a small, unspoken thing, that contact, but in the dim glow, with the warp pressing closer, it felt like the only real anchor I had left. "How bad?" she whispered. I watched the runes cycle across the cherub's optics, saw values climb where they should never climb, saw stress patterns register in bands reserved for theoretical scenarios. Warp density, directional pressure, nonlinear resonance. "It's gathering," I said slowly. "Like a tide." "No, like the deck shuddered, not the jitter of a fluctuation, not the yaw of a course correction. A single, deep convulsion, as if something vast had inhaled around the glory of dawn. From beyond the sealed door, Lady Cerise screamed. Her voice came through the Vox lattice like tearing metal, raw and choked with static. "It's forming. Then the link cut, overwhelmed by a howl of background corruption. Lyra snapped her helmet onto her head in one fluid motion, visor clamping down over her eyes. Forming what? I stared at the sacred sigils scrawled across the navigator's door. They quivered, parchment rustling in a wind that didn't exist. The lumen light dimmed again, this time not returning to normal, just holding, like the ship was holding its breath with me. The warp outside pulsed. Once, twice. A slow, deliberate rhythm. A heartbeat. The moment the warp swelled like a rhythm. "Womb," I whispered, finally giving the thought shape. I knew we were already dead. Lyra's gauntleted hand closed around my forearm. Grip, firm, grounding. "Then stay with me," she said. "If we're dead, we die together." For a moment, the smell of ozone and incense faded beneath the warmth of her fingers. Then the warp pulsed again, and the real screaming began. The screaming didn't come from a throat. It came from the ship. The glory of dawn vibrated in a way no metal structure should ever move, like sinew instead of steel, like breath instead of bulkheads. The hymn ducts above us choked mid-verse, voices warping into long, wet distortions before cutting out entirely. Every lumen guttered to a faint, shivering glow that seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as the warp outside. Lyra steadied her stance, boots magnetized to the deck as she raised her las pistol. "Elan, talk to me. What is happening?" I swallowed hard. "Pressure. Directional. The warp is pushing." "Warp doesn't push," she said. "Until today," I whispered. A low resonance shuddered through my skull like a thought that wasn't mine brushing against my mind. My nose stung. A thin trickle of blood slid down my lip. Lyra saw it. "Hey." She wiped it with her thumb, visor inches from my faceplate. "Stay with me." Another pulse, a deeper one. The cherub rune display erupted in a cascade of red sigils, the machine's wings twitching as if trying to flee its own metal casing. Filed. Distortion. Critical Geller resonance. Unstable unclassified warp activity. Emergent. That last line froze my blood. No alert had ever used that designation. I turned toward the navigator's door. The sigils pinned to the adamantium shook violently. A faint glow seeped through the seams around the doorframe. Warp light, sickly green and impossibly bright. Lyra aimed her weapon at the door. "If anything comes through there, it won't be something we can. I'll shoot anyway." I almost smiled. Almost. The Vox lattice crackled, then flooded with static so dense it felt like pressure on my teeth. Through the distortion came 3 words, Cerese's voice, stretched thin and trembling. "It's forming. Elan." Lyra flinched. "She spoke your name." "No." I shook my head. "She didn't. She thought it. The link is psychic now." The floor bucked beneath us, pitching hard enough that Lyra grabbed my shoulder to keep me upright. A deep metallic groan echoed through the antechamber as one of the structural beams above bent with an audible pop, then silence. The kind that doesn't feel empty, the kind that feels patient. The lumens steadied into a dim, pulsing green. My breath fogged in the air, even though the temperature hadn't changed. My vision blurred for half a heartbeat, doubling the room, then snapping back to a single image. Lyra held her pistol steady, breathing slow and controlled despite the tremor in her voice. "What's it doing?" I exhaled shakily. "I think it's waiting." "For what?" The warp pulsed again, a soft throb, a heartbeat. "For itself," I whispered. A thin, vibrating shriek echoed from farther down the corridor, a sound like metal being peeled back over bone. Lyra stepped in front of me instinctively. "Back up. Stay behind me." "It's not coming from outside," I said. "That sound is from our own hull." Another shriek. Longer. Closer. I activated my auspex. The display flickered, corrupted by warp interference, but a faint anomaly appeared at the edge of its range, an expanding distortion, spherical, feeding on its surroundings like a hungry void. "It's growing," I said, voice cracking. "Something is growing inside the Imperium." like an organism. Lyra didn't look at me. She kept her weapon trained on the corridor. Are you telling me the warp is giving birth? I'm telling you that something is gestating, and the Geller field is acting like a membrane. A low vibration ran through the ship as though a pressure wave rolled across its length. My teeth rattled. The air tasted like burned copper. Lyra grabbed my wrist. We need to move. Antechamber is too exposed. No. I shook my head violently. If it's looking for weak points, the safest place is near the navigator. She anchors our reality. We stay here. As if on Quay, the navigator screamed again, this time with a wet, gargling quality that made my stomach twist. The luminous cracks around the door pulsed, brighter, bright enough to cast our shadows long across the deck. Lyra stepped closer to me, visor reflecting the emerald glow. Ilan, what do we do? I forced myself to breathe through the terror. Forced myself to meet her eyes behind that visor. We wait, I said, and we pray the membrane holds. A deep, monstrous pulse slammed into the ship hard enough that every lumen burst, plunging us into strobing darkness lit only by the warp glow around the navigator's door. Something pushed from the other side. Not with force, with intent. And the Geller field cracked like glass. When the Geller field cracked, it did not sound like a breaking machine. It sounded like a breaking mind. A sharp, psychic snap echoed through the antechamber, vibrating inside my skull rather than my ears. The lumen strips flickered erratically, stuttering between darkness and sickly green pulses that made the shadows jerk in impossible directions. The scent of incense burned into something metallic and sour, as if the air itself had gone rancid. Lyra braced herself, one hand on my chest to steady me as the deck lurched sideways. Stay behind me, Ilan. Whatever comes through that door, I shoot until it stops moving. It won't move the way we understand, I whispered. Another crack, this time visible. A thin green fracture of warp light traced itself across the air above the navigator's door, like a glowing fissure in reality. The purity seals hanging from the doorframe shriveled, parchment curling as the holy ink boiled into drifting ash. Lyra raised her pistol. Ceres is in there. I know. You're supposed to help her. I know. A deeper pulse rolled through the ship, slow, heavy, like the contraction of something enormous and hidden. The fracture widened. The glow brightened. Lyra's gauntlet tightened around my arm. What if she's already? Before she could finish, the navigator's voice tore through the vox lattice again, distorted, stretched, layered with whispers. It breathes. The sentence cut off, swallowed by static that pulsed in time with the warp contractions. I stepped forward instinctively. Lyra caught my wrist. Don't. You're not going near that door until we know what's pushing through. I should have argued. I should have told her the navigator needed me. But the Mayans. Truth was simpler. I'm scared, I admitted. Lyra's visor dipped toward me. Good, means you're still sane. The fracture above the door suddenly widened, a thin crack of blinding green tearing open like a slit in the world. Our rush of air slammed outward, icy cold and reeking of ozone and rot. Papers whipped through the air. My hair lifted. My eyes watered instantly. Lyra shouted over the rising wind. Back, Ilan. Get back. I didn't move, because I could see inside, through the crack, through the door, through the veil between reality and the Imperium. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't imagination. It was a window. Inside the tier, I saw a cavernous space of swirling colors, reds, purples, greens folding into each other like organs pulsing around a central mass. Our shape hung suspended in that void, translucent, pulsating, cocoon-like. Veins of warp energy wrapped around it like tendrils. It quivered with each pulse, growing, forming, preparing. Lyra pulled me back, dragging me by my collar. Don't look at it. But I couldn't look away. Not until the cocoon twitched. Not until the thing inside shifted. Not until a pale, half-formed limb pressed against the inner membrane. The membrane bulged outward, toward me. My breath seized, my knees buckled. A sharp pain stabbed behind my eyes as if something had reached through the crack and scraped a fingernail against my mind. Lyra slammed her visor against mine, blocking my view, forcing my gaze away. Ilan listened to my voice. "Stay here, with me." The wind stopped abruptly. The glow faded. The fracture sealed itself with a wet, snapping sound. The antechamber went silent but for our breathing. Lyra's hands gripped my shoulders. "What did you see?" "Ah, cocoon," I rasped. "Something growing inside. Daemon." "I don't think so." "What then?" I swallowed hard. "Something new." The Vox cherub twitched violently, issuing a single warbled warning. "Incubation complete." Lyra stepped back, eyes wide. "What does that mean?" I stared at the navigator's door. "That whatever was forming is ready." The hours after the incubation warning did not feel like time. They felt like a slow unraveling. The glory of dawn drifted in silence, suspended between the Imperium and the last threads of real space. The Geller field flickered every few minutes, each flicker followed by a wave of nausea that made my bones feel hollow. Lyra stayed close, too close. Maybe, but I needed that grounding more than breath. Every lumen cast shadow looked slightly wrong, stretching too far or not far enough. The air tasted stale one moment, metallic the next, then suddenly sweet like rotting fruit. None of us trusted our senses anymore. The nearest Vox tower emitted faint static, nothing more. The ship's choir had fallen silent, either unconscious, dead, or retreating inward to preserve their sanity. The only mechanized sound left was the low hum of the field generators fighting a losing war. Lyra spoke first. "Did anything else break through?" "No," I said, "but the pressure hasn't changed." "Meaning?" "Meaning whatever formed is still pressing against us." A deep vibration ran through the decking, slow, rhythmic, familiar. The heartbeat. Lyra steadied herself as the metal bulkheads flexed with the pulse. "How can something alive be inside the warp?" "Everything is alive in the warp," I said. "But not like this." We walked the corridor cautiously. Every few steps, I blinked, and the world felt slightly shifted deck plates curving at angles that weren't there before, lumen lines wavering like reflections in water. Lyra touched my arm, grounding me each time. We passed a pair of crewmen kneeling on the floor, their hands clasped over their mouths as if holding in screams. Their eyes stared in opposite directions, one dilated, the other shrunken. Their skin glistened with sweat. Lyra knelt beside them. "Soldiers, report." Neither answered. When she touched the shoulder of the nearest man, his mouth opened. A sound came out. Not a scream, not a word. A single, broken syllable that didn't belong in any human alphabet. She recoiled instantly, instincts sharp. "They're compromised. Warp sick," I said quietly. "Their minds are cracking before their bodies do." We moved on. Every door we passed bore deep scratches on the inside. Crew had tried to claw their way out, or something inside had tried to claw its way through. A metallic clanging echoed from a ventilation shaft, echoing like a heartbeat against the ductwork. Lyra aimed her pistol at it. If anything comes through there, a hiss, a tremble, then silence. We didn't wait around to see what caused it. As we turned the next corner, the lighting panels flared bright white, and for a heartbeat, the corridor became too clear. I saw everything, in sharp, surgical detail, the peeling paint on the bulkheads, the tremor in Lyra's gloved hand, the dust motes freezing midair, the shadows halting, refusing to move with us. Then the light snapped back to green. Lyra exhaled sharply. "That wasn't real." "No," I whispered. "It was." We reached the sub-bridge alcove, one of the few consoles still partially operational. Box Officer Brennan sat slumped in the chair, eyes wide, unmoving. Lyra checked his pulse. "He's alive." "Not entirely," I said, because Brennan wasn't staring at nothing. He was staring at something only he could see. A faint glimmer hovered around his head. warp residue, like dust motes suspended in a glimmer field. His lips moved silently. I leaned closer. At first, I thought he was mumbling. Then I realized he was repeating one phrase over and over on a loop. "It hears us." Lyra straightened. "What hears us?" Before I could answer, a deep tremor ran through the ship, hard enough to rattle the ceiling plates. The lumen strips flickered again, but this time something else happened. For a single, impossible instant, the corridor stretched, expanding, folding outward as if pulled by invisible hands. The walls rippled like fabric caught in a wind. Lyra grabbed my arm. "Elan." What? What was that?" "Reality bending. Because of the creature." The lights flared, and a whisper slid through the air. Soft, cold, intimate. Closer. Lyra raised her pistol. My knees went weak. The heartbeat pulsed once more. Whatever was born wanted us. The heartbeat didn't stop after the whisper. It grew clearer, closer. Each pulse made my vision tremble, as though the world around me were nothing but a thin image stretched over something deeper, hungrier. Lyra positioned herself half a step ahead, weapon raised, but even she couldn't hide the rigid tension running through her shoulders. "Stay behind me," she murmured. "If it comes close, don't look directly at it. Don't even blink if you can help it." "That won't save us," I said. "Then it'll make me feel better." The corridor stretched again, only an inch, maybe two, but wrong enough that both of us felt it. The air rippled as though something was pushing its face against the skin of reality, testing its strength. We reached a maintenance hatch, where half the Mechanicus deckhands had gathered, pressed against the walls like cornered animals. A junior and Hinzer huddled in the corner, chanting Binharic fragments through trembling vox grills. Lyra knelt beside him. "What's happening to the ship?" The engineer's vox crackled, his words distorted. "Field, decaying, resonance collapse, pressure, from outside." He hesitated, head jerking like a marionette, with severed strings. "From a locus." Lyra frowned. "A locus? You mean a presence?" The engineer's voice lowered to a metal whisper. "A womb." The word made the air colder. I stepped forward. "Is it alive, the anomaly?" His vox crackled again, rising in pitch. "Alive, incubating, expanding." Then his head twisted violently toward me. Not turned, twisted as though something inside wanted to face me without turning the body. "It wants anchor," he croaked. Before Lyra could pull me back, the engineer reached for me, fingers stretching far too long, joints bending at unnatural angles. Lyra fired without hesitation, 3 last rounds snapping his arm back. The engineer crumpled, whispering static as he fell. Lyra howled me to my feet. "Move. Now." We sprinted through the corridor, but every step felt wrong. Too heavy, too light, too slow. The ship's gravity fluctuated with each heartbeat, not enough to knock us over, but enough to keep panic scraping at the back of my skull. Halfway down the hall, the lights surged, a flare of blinding green, warp light. I stumbled, hands flying to my temples, and then it hit me, a vision, not a hallucination, not imagination, a forced revelation. My surroundings dissolved into liquid color. The corridor melted away, replaced by a vast dark expanse rippling with iridescent shapes. In the center of it hung a translucent sac, organic, pulsating, immense. Warp tendrils wrapped around it like veins, and inside the sac, something moved, not with the twitch of a creature, with the certainty of a being that already knew the shape of the universe. Lyra's voice echoed distantly. "Elan, come back, look at me, don't look at it." But I couldn't look away. A pale limb pressed against the inner membrane, then another, then something like a face unformed, shifting, and it saw me, not with eyes, with awareness. I gasped as a cold hand closed around my mind. Memories flickered like pages in a burning book. Lyra laughing in the mess hall, the navigator's first lesson to me, the oath I swore to the ship. All of them peeled away, examined, tasted. A voice slid through my thoughts, cold and newborn. "I hear you." The sack pulsed. The heartbeat thundered. Something cracked. Lyra's hands grabbed my face, wrenching my gaze away. "Ilan, look at me." The vision shattered. I collapsed against her chest, my breath shaking uncontrollably. The corridor returned, but subtly wrong. Edges blurred like a fading dream. Lyra held my face between her hands. "Tell me what you saw." I tried. My throat closed around the words. "It's becoming," I whispered. "And it knows us. It knows me." Lyra swore under her breath. "We need to reach the navigator. Now." Before we could move, a metallic groan rolled through the ship deeper and louder than before. The deck flexed beneath us like a living thing. The navigator's scream tore through the Vox lattice again, raw and gurgling. Its croning. Lyra's grip tightened. The nightmare was no longer forming, it was arriving. The corridor ahead of us breathed as if the metal lungs of the glory of dawn had begun sucking in corrupted air from the Imperium itself. Every flicker of the lumen strips, stretching our shadows into warped silhouettes that twitched with a life not our own. Lyra kept her pistol raised, her steps disciplined and measured, but I could feel the tension rolling through her armor, the coiled readiness of someone who had already accepted that every rule she had been trained to trust was now failing in real time. The ship was no longer a vessel carrying us through the warp. It was becoming something caught between states, its structure bending at angles my eyes recoiled from, its corridors shimmering like heat-warped metal, despite the cold tightening the air around us. We pushed forward, each step carrying the weight of uncertainty, until the deck beneath us shifted, with a sickening lurch, almost as though something titanic beneath the floor had rolled in its sleep. The walls creaked with a low, guttural moan as panels bulged outward for a heartbeat before snapping back, leaving only faint indentations like fingertips pressed into soft flesh. Lyra extended an arm across my chest to halt me, her breathing fogging the interior of her visor, as she scanned the corridor ahead with the rigid focus of a marksman who knew that hesitation was death. I wanted to tell her that her weapon meant nothing to what was forming beyond our reality, but I held my tongue. Faith, in situations like this, was measured not in saints or symbols, but in the steady presence of one person who refused to abandon you. We reached the threshold of a junction where the smell hit us first, thick, clotted, organic, like rotting entrails left too long under a weak sun. The lighting here had died entirely, leaving only the faint, ghostly pulse of warp light bleeding through the warp seams of the bulkheads. At first I thought the shapes on the ground were debris or discarded gear. I realized the corridor floor was littered with the crumpled forms of crew members, contorted in positions no human bones could achieve without breaking. Their eyes were open, unfocused, and reflecting the green shimmer from the walls like glass beads. Their mouths hung slack, lips quivering in silent murmurs, each of them whispering fragments of words not meant for mortal tongues. I could feel the vibration of their voices more than hear them, the faint psychic pressure scratching at the edges of my thoughts like claws seeking entry. Lyra took a cautious step forward, boots moving silently among the bodies. She raised 2 fingers in a silent signal: wait, watch, measure the threat. But before either of us could act, every corpse spasmed in unison, not violently, not with convulsions, but with a subtle ripple, a wave that passed through their limbs like puppets, tugged by a single unseen string. Their heads turned toward us with unnatural synchrony, eyes locking onto mine with a focus so absolute it felt like a blade touching my throat. A cold breath of air slid across my face, though neither Lyra nor I had moved. The bodies whispered one word in perfect unison, their voices layered, broken, and hollow. Mother. Lyra fired instinctively, the las round cutting through the stillness with a burst of incandescent heat, but the beam passed harmlessly through them, as if they were nothing but remnants of memory lingering on a surface too thin to hold their weight. The bodies returned to stillness instantly, heads tilting back into their previous positions, as though the animation had been nothing but a momentary spasm of borrowed life. "We need to move," Lyra said, voice trembling despite her control. "Whatever touched them is watching us." I nodded, unable to tear my gaze from the corpses, feeling the invisible stare that lingered behind their glassy eyes. We turned the corner toward the navigator's sanctum, and the corridor ahead bent outward, like a corridor seen through a fisheye lens. The walls curving away from us, as though recoiling from something approaching from the far end. A shape appeared, not human, not Daemon. A distortion like a silhouette cut from the world, its edges flickering as if it had not yet decided what shape to hold. Lyra raised her pistol, but I grabbed her wrist, feeling my voice crack as I whispered, "Don't shoot, it's not fully here." The distortion pulsed. A deep thrumming rolled through the deck, vibrating up my spine. The warp light flickered violently, and then the navigator screamed through the Vox lattice with a voice no longer her own. "It is born, run." Lyra pulled me backward just as the corridor buckled inward toward the distortion like metal twisting into a maw. The nightmare had entered real space. The moment the corridor imploded behind us, Lyra dragged me through the side hatch with a force I didn't know she possessed, slamming the manual seal just as the metal around it bent inward like tin sucked into a vacuum. A low, resonant rumble echoed through the wall, vibrating through my teeth, as though something vast scraped a limb, or the idea of a limb against the other side of the bulkhead. My lungs seized, the recycled air turning sharp, almost crystalline, each breath burning like inhaled dust from a shattered shrine. Lyra pressed her helmet to the door, listening, her gauntleted hand trembling despite the rigid discipline of her posture. When the rumbling subsided, she stepped back, visor reflecting the sickly green pulses that continued to shiver through the bulkheads. "It's moving through the ship," she said, voice flat, steadying herself by will alone. "Not walking, not crawling, just moving." She looked at me. "Can it sense us?" "It sensed me before it was born," I whispered, feeling the truth settle like a weight behind my sternum. "It knows every presence inside this hull the moment we think. It doesn't need to see us. It doesn't even need us to be real." Lyra reached out, gripping the back of my neck through the thin padding of my hood, grounding me with that single, wordless gesture. We had shared 1,000 hours of silence in the dim glow of the ship's night cycle, sharing stories of worlds we barely remembered. Now, the silence between us was tight as a garrote. The narrow maintenance passage stretched ahead, its lumen strips flickering in uneven pulses, each burst of light revealing new distortions in the metal indentations that looked like fingerprints, thence like ribs pressed from beneath the plating. A long, shallow groove dragging along the deck, as though something ponderous had been pulled through here. Lyra knelt to inspect it, running 2 fingers along the groove. Her visor dipped. "This wasn't here an hour ago." I crouched beside her. The groove hummed faintly, vibrating the air above it, warping my vision as I leaned closer. "It isn't physical," I murmured. "It's a scar, meaning it passed through this corridor, and reality bent around it. What you're seeing is where the real space membrane stretched." Lyra stood slowly, holstering her pistol long enough to brace her hands on her hips. "So it's leaving trails?" "No," I murmured, stomach tightening. "It's leaving warnings." The next tremor rolled through the ship, sharper, more focused, making the metal beneath us ripple like the skin of a drum struck from beneath. The vibration carried a sense of direction eastward, toward the navigator's sanctum, toward the only mind aboard capable of perceiving the creature's true shape. Lyra grabbed my arm again. "We can't keep moving blind. We need to reach Cerise. She might still be alive. Our only anchor to what's left of real space." I hesitated. My pulse hammered in my skull. "If it reaches her, it will reach all of us," Lyra said, stepping into my space until her visor hovered inches from my face. "If we don't do something first." There was no argument strong enough to counter that. Whatever had been born was hunting not with hunger, but with purpose. It was seeking the one mind on this vessel capable of seeing it clearly enough to define it. Once defined, it could imprint itself into reality, the way Daemons anchored through belief or fear. But this thing did not require worship to exist. It only required awareness. We pressed deeper into the passage, moving through a labyrinth of narrow service tunnels, thick with the stench of oil, sanctified incense, and something beneath it, something sweet, cloying, like fruit left too long in the heat. We passed a series of cracked cogitator screens, where ghost images flickered across the shattered glass. One display sputtered to life as we passed, showing a distorted reflection of myself, not the man I was now, but an older version, face hollowed and eyes dark, mouthing words I couldn't hear. Lyra smashed the screen with the butt of her pistol without hesitation. "Ignore it." I nodded, but the image clung to me like a parasite, burrowing beneath my ribs. Another tremor, another pulse of warp light. This one closer, much closer. Lyra pushed me forward, urgency sharpening her voice. "It's accelerating. Elan, whatever was born, is feeding on the ship's decay. If we don't reach Cerise now, the glory of dawn won't survive another hour." I felt it then, a cold, intimate pressure curling around the back of my mind. A presence, a hand, a newborn consciousness searching for its parents. Lyra felt my shudder and tightened her grip on my arm. "Move," she whispered, "before it finds us." And we ran toward the navigator's chamber, where the nightmare had first begun. The deeper we pushed toward the navigator's sanctum, the more the glory of dawn ceased to resemble a vessel built by human hands. The corridors grew narrower and wider in alternating breaths, as if the ship itself were expanding and contracting with the same rhythm as the warp-born heartbeat that echoed faintly through the metal. The lumen strips above crackled with bursts of emerald static, casting long shadows that dragged themselves a fraction of a second behind our movements, delayed like echoes running through thick, corrupted air. Lyra kept her weapon raised, posture rigid, every step measured, yet I could see the slow tightening in her shoulders, the subtle admission that even she, trained to face horrors most guardsmen never lived long enough to name, felt the weight of something that was not content to exist outside our reality. We reached a junction where the bulkheads had twisted inward, forming spiraled ridges that looked disturbingly organic. Lyra placed a boot against the nearest ridge, testing its solidity. The metal felt soft beneath her heel, metal that remembered being metal, but was quickly forgetting. I placed a hand on the wall beside her, the cold surface rippling faintly under my touch, as though I had laid my palm against chilled flesh rather than alloyed ceramite. A subtle pulse thrummed beneath my fingertips, beating in perfect synchrony with the warp heart echoing through the ship. Lyra seized my wrist, pulling my hand away. "Don't touch it again," she said quietly. "I think it's connected to the creature," I murmured. "The walls, the ship, it's sensing us." "It can sense you without the walls helping," Lyra replied, attempting a dry edge to her voice that didn't quite hide her worry. "Let's not make it easier." We continued forward, following the faint trail of malfunctioning lumen strips that flickered like candle flames drowning in wind. As we approached a wider corridor, I felt the now pressure inside my head rise, subtle at first, like the onset of a migraine before sharpening into a splitting sting behind my eyes. My vision blurred. The humming of the Geller field turned shrill in my ears. Lyra caught my elbow instantly, lowering me into a steady crouch. "Breathe," she said, kneeling beside me with one hand braced on my shoulder. "Look at me, eyes on me." Her voice cut through the fog like a tether. I forced my gaze to meet hers through the cracked visor. My heart hammered against my ribs, as if trying to escape the tightening pressure from the entity pressing against my consciousness. A cold ripple crawled through my thoughts, searching, testing, peeling. Then the vision hit. The corridor dissolved around me in a wash of sickly green and violent crimson, colors swirling together like liquefied organs churned by an unseen will. I saw shapes vast, serpentine arcs of translucent flesh, twisting around a pulsating cocoon, suspended in a void that stretched into infinity. Veins as thick as streets pulsed with luminous fluid, feeding the growing mass within. Then, through the distorted air, the membrane of the cocoon thinned, revealing the faint outline of a humanoid shape curled inside. It wasn't human. It wasn't Daemon. It was potential, and it was aware. It pressed a half-formed face to the membrane, smooth, pale, almost infant-like, and though it had no eyes, it looked directly at me. My breath caught in my throat. A thin crack appeared across the membrane, and the creature's mouth, or the suggestion of one, moved with slow deliberation, not speaking, not breathing, learning. A whisper slithered through the vision, sliding across my thoughts with chilling intimacy. "Show me." I yerked violently, the world snapping back like a taut wire released from tension. Lyra held me upright, her face close, her tone dropping into raw urgency. Elan, stay with me. What did you see?" I swallowed, tasting. Blood. It's aware now. Fully aware. It's learning the shape of thoughts. It's trying to understand what we are. Lyra tightened her grip around my shoulders, her breath fogging the inside of her visor. "Then we move faster, before it learns how to reach us." Before I could answer, the ship groaned with a sound that made my skin crawl. The deck beneath us dipped as though pulled downward by invisible fingers. A distant clatter echoed through the corridor, metal shifting, warping, something dragging itself closer through narrow spaces it didn't have a shape to enter yet. Lyra pulled me to my feet, supporting my weight with a strength born not of power, but of refusal to let go. "We're getting to Ceres. Now, before it decides you're the first thing it wants to understand." She didn't have to say what we both feared. The creature wasn't hunting bodies. It was hunting minds, and I had already been marked. The corridor leading toward the navigator's sanctum no longer resembled any human-made structure. It curved in unnatural arcs, widening and narrowing with each step as if reacting to our presence, like a creature contracting its throat around something it intended to swallow. The lumen strips along the ceiling flickered with rhythmic bursts, echoing the same pulse we had felt, growing stronger with every passing minute, the heartbeat of something still deciding what form reality should take. Lyra kept her arm around my waist for balance, guiding me through pockets of distorted gravity where one step felt feather light and the next felt like walking through liquid iron. Every breath tasted of copper and incense, the air saturated with residues of warp pressure leaking through the wounded hull. Ahead of us loomed the great vault door of the navigator's chamber, normally sealed by triple-locked adamantium wards and wrapped in protective parchments. Now, the parchments had blackened and curled into ash that drifted across the deck like the remnants of a burned cathedral. The metal door itself bowed inward, flexing faintly with each pulse, as if something on the other side was inhaling the material, tasting it, preparing to push through. For the first time since I had known her, Lyra hesitated. Her shoulders stiffened, her visor tilted slightly downward, as though she were trying to read the movements of a predator crouched behind the barrier. "Elan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "If she's gone, we turn back immediately. I'm not letting you walk into that if it's already taken her." I placed my hand on the doorframe, feeling the cold sweat on my glove evaporate in the unnatural chill. If Ceres is still alive, she might be the only mind capable of anchoring us, of slowing it down. Maybe even, "Nothing slows something like that," Lyra said. "Not walls, not prayers, not bodies." She wasn't wrong, but we had no other path. The heartbeat pulsed again, louder, so loud I could feel the vibration crawl through the marrow of my bones. The lights stuttered violently. The deck lurched sideways, nearly throwing us both into the opposite wall. A shriek followed, metallic, high-pitched, the sound of a bulkhead tearing. Then came a sound worse than shrieking. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence, the kind that empties the world of meaning. Slowly, a crack appeared down the center of the vault door. Not a warp fissure, not an explosion. Something pushed from the inside, folding metal outward like softened wax. Lyra shifted into a firing stance, her body moving with mechanical precision. "Elan." Behind me. Now. I did not argue. As the crack widened, a scatter of golden light spilled through, shimmering like dust motes suspended in a cathedral's broken window. For a heartbeat, I dared to believe it was the navigator summoning a protective ward, but the golden dust moved too freely, swirling in patterns that resembled breath rather than light. Lyra edged forward and pressed her helmet against the gap, peering in. After a moment, she exhaled a thin, trembling sound. "It's her," she said. "Cerise alive." I stepped beside her and looked through. Cerise Calvian hovered inches above her throne, suspended in a lattice of warp light, her third eye blazing open, leaking tears of liquid gold down her cheeks. Her mouth hung open in a silent scream, and her body convulsed in slow, spasmodic shudders as if she were being rewritten from the inside. But she was alive. Barely. And she saw me. Not with her physical eyes, those were already clouded. But her third eye locked onto me with a clarity sharper than any blade. Her lips moved. No sound. Just a shape. One word. "Run." Then her body snapped backward with unnatural force, as if yanked by a colossal hand, and the golden lattice shattered into vapor. A wave of pressure burst outward, slamming into the door and knocking us both to the floor. Lyra rolled instantly, covering me with her armored frame as the vault door split down the center and began peeling inward, centimeter by groaning centimeter. "Elan," she whispered, gripping my arm so hard it hurt. "It's coming through her." The lights died. The heartbeat thundered, and the newborn nightmare began pushing into real space. The vault door tore open with the slow, deliberate force of a predator savoring its first breath before stepping into a world it had not yet decided how to inhabit. Metal screamed, bending inward in thick, rippling folds that resembled the peeling of a fruit's skin, layers of adamantium surrendering as if they were nothing more than softened wax. Lyra braced herself against the deck with one hand and pulled me behind a fallen bulkhead panel, shielding me with her body while flickering warp light poured through the widening gap, painting the corridor in shifting hues of sickly green and molten gold. Every pulse of that light tightened the air in my lungs until breathing became an act of will. Through the tearing door, I saw Cerise's body suspended midair, limbs twisted into unnatural arcs, as though invisible wires moved her by angles no human joints should allow. Her third eye blazed like a dying star, its brilliance distorting the space around her head in shimmering ripples that bent the chamber's geometry like water disturbed by a stone. Her mouth hung open in a rictus of agony, and from her throat came a low, continuous hum vibrating, layered, not a human sound at all. It was the sound of a mind being used as a doorway. Lyra rose from cover, planting herself between me and the sanctum, pistol raised, though both of us knew it was little more than a gesture of defiance. "Stay back," she murmured, jaw clenched tight. "Whatever it's doing to her, whatever it's using her for, you don't look at it. You hear me?" Her voice shook. That frightened me more than the warp light. I pushed myself up behind her, feeling the right gravity shift again, first heavy, then feather light, then a moment of disorientation where every blood cell in my body felt as though it rotated in the wrong direction. Reality thinned around us as if the ship's structure were losing its memory of what it was supposed to be. Cerise jerked it violently, spine bending backward in a perfect arc. Her fingers extended toward us, not reaching but pointing, forming a jagged silhouette against the pulsating membrane of light behind her. The cocoon, the thing I had seen in my visions, was now bleeding into her chamber, a translucent sphere of warp flesh pushing through the boundary between dimensions. Veins of luminescent green wrapped around it, tightening rhythmically, each contraction bursting small motes of vapor that drifted into the air, carrying the smell of rotting fruit and ionized metal. I gripped Lyra's arm. It's not just coming through her, it's using her too. The cocoon split, not explosively, not violently, but with a slow, wet peeling, as if the membrane were releasing something too delicate to rush. A pale, half-formed shape emerged, limbs long and smooth, torso unfinished, head bowed as though listening to a distant voice. It did not have eyes, but it looked at us with a presence that pressed against my mind like a cold hand sliding behind my thoughts. Lyra stiffened, her breath hitching inside her helmet. "It's aware," she whispered. "Throne. Elan. It sees us." The newborn thing extended a limb toward Cerise, brushing her cheek. Her body convulsed, and her third eye finally dimmed, its light extinguishing like a candle smothered by a wet cloth. She dropped limp to the floor, the glow around her collapsing into a trembling haze. The thing turned its faceless head in our direction, and the walls shuddered, the deck dipping inward, as if reality itself recoiled from being observed by something that had not yet settled on what existence meant. Lyra grabbed my arm, dragging me backward. We move now. But my legs refused to cooperate. The creature's presence rooted me in place, freezing breath in my lungs. I felt its mind brush mine, no words, no images, just an emotion like cold admiration, the curiosity of a newborn intellect discovering a new kind of prey. Then Ceresa's voice, broken, distant, yet unmistakable, whispered through the vox lattice, though her body lay lifeless at the creature's feet. "Run." Lyra didn't hesitate. She hauled me by the collar, her strength cutting through my paralysis as she dragged me down the corridor at full sprint. Behind us, the chamber burst with a pulse of warp light that shattered the nearest lumen strips, plunging the ship into trembling darkness. The nightmare had fully entered our world, and it was learning to walk. The ship's spine shuddered beneath us as Lyra dragged me down the corridor, reality flexing with each pulse of the nightmare's newborn presence. The glory of dawn was no longer merely failing, she was transforming, every rivet and conduit bending toward a shape dictated by something that had never known solidity, structure, or physics. The lumen strips overhead glowed with intermittent bursts of warp light, each flare revealing brief after-images of the creature's silhouette at the periphery of vision, like a phantom flickering between frames of reality. I clung to Lyra's arm, legs stumbling, muscles refusing to forget the cold paralysis that had seized them when the newborn pressed against my thoughts. Our boots struck the deck in uneven rhythm where gravity faltered, growing heavy in one breath, weightless the next, until both sensations merged into a nauseating contradiction. Lyra powered through it with the stubborn discipline bred into every Kazakhin-trained soldier, gripping her pistol in one hand, while her other arm remained around my waist to keep me upright. Even through her helmet, I could feel her fear, controlled, measured, but fear, nonetheless, the kind that came from witnessing something that did not follow the rules of battle or existence. A series of metallic cracks rolled down the corridor behind us, like bulkheads being twisted apart by invisible hands. The sound echoed strangely, repeating from multiple directions at once, as if the ship itself had become a hall of mirrors reflecting the nightmare in ways that broke all sense of orientation. Lyra shoved me into a side passage and sealed the hatch behind us, her breath coming in hard bursts inside the visor. "We need a plan," she said, voice shaking despite her resolve. "We can't outrun something that doesn't need to move. It folds space. It Thronilan. What is this thing?" I leaned against the vibrating wall, fighting back the dizziness creeping up my spine. "It's not a Daemon. It's not a warp construct. It wasn't summoned. It wasn't called. It wasn't shaped by fear or belief." Lyra lowered her weapon slightly, visor turning toward me. "Then what birthed it?" "The warp itself," I whispered. "The way a storm births lightning, the way pressure births a star. It's a natural process. Wrong, but natural." Lyra stared through her visor for several heartbeats, meaning there could be more. "Yes." She pressed her forehead against her helmet's interior, letting out a low breath that bordered on a curse. "Then we're not just dealing with survival. We're dealing with precedent." Before I could answer, a low, rolling wave of pressure surged through the passageway, bending the metal walls inward as if an invisible hand had pressed against them from outside reality. The lights flickered, then twisted into elongated streaks like drawn-out filaments stretching toward a distant vanishing point. Lyra grabbed my hand and pulled me forward just as the deck trembled beneath us, splitting open in a jagged seam that breathed warm vapor. "Ilan, focus," she said, pulling me down another shaft ladder. "If we get to the plasma core, the tech priests might still be alive. They can trigger a manual detonation." I froze on the ladder. "Lyra, a plasma core detonation will tear the ship apart. That's the point." "No," I said, voice tight. "I mean completely. It won't leave remains, not even escape pods." Lyra met my gaze, visor glinting in the green light. Then we pray escape pods aren't the only option. We dropped into the next deck, landing amid a maze of support struts. The air here tasted worse, thicker, humid, tinged with something rotten. A faint drip echoed in the dark, rhythmic and slow. When Lyra shone her helmet light forward, the beam cut through a suspended curtain of organic residue, hanging from the ceiling, thin tendrils like translucent vines, pulsing faintly with green luminescence. "It's seeding," I whispered, "like spores." Lyra cut through the vines with her blade, pushing deeper until the corridor opened, into a wide chamber quivering with the slow pulse of the newborn's presence. The walls here bulged with translucent sacs pressed between the metal ribs, each one twitching faintly, as if fed by the very warp pressure bleeding through the hull. Lyra's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's multiplying." "No," I said, throat dry. "These aren't young, these are echoes, projections of possibilities. Reality is trying to figure out what it's supposed to be now that something new has arrived." A distant clang echoed through the hull, slow, deliberate, impossibly heavy. Lyra raised her pistol. "It's following us." "It doesn't need to follow us," I said. "It's already everywhere." Another pulse of pressure slammed through the deck. This time the scream that followed wasn't Cerese's. It came from the plasma core chamber. The scream rising from the plasma core chamber wasn't a human cry, not entirely. It carried a resonance beneath it, a layered, throbbing undertone that vibrated through the deck like the hum of an exposed organ. Lyra froze mid-stride, her visor tilting toward the sound, the tension in her posture tightening until she seemed carved from stone. The scream rose again, ragged, guttural, then suddenly cut short, replaced by a scraping hiss like steam forced through wet cloth. The green pulse of warp light flickered across the corridor ahead, illuminating rivulets of condensation crawling down the bulkheads like sweat beading on favored skin. Lyra grabbed my arm before I could move. "Listen to me," she said, her voice low, steady, despite the tremor beneath it. "If we go in there, we don't hesitate. Whatever we see, whatever shape it takes, whatever it whispers, we don't stop moving. We hit the manual detonation, we get to the coffin pods, and we launch. That's the plan. No deviations." I nodded, though the very idea of reaching an escape coffin felt like a distant dream. The newborn nightmare pressed against my thoughts in slow, probing waves, each one colder and more curious than the last. Its awareness was growing, tightening around the ship like a web that didn't bother to hide itself anymore. My thoughts weren't entirely my own. I could feel its interest, its fascination, the quiet pleasure it took in learning the contours of a human mind. I tried to shake it off, but the sensation remained, like a phantom fingertip tracing the inside of my skull. We approached the plasma chamber's access ramp, the metal beneath our boots dented and warped by forces that had no right to interact with matter. The doorway yawned open, the thick blast shutters peeled backward like petals torn from a flower. A faint, distorted heat shimmered inside, not warm, but somehow inverted, a cold pull that made my breath fog even as the deck beneath us radiated dying warmth. Lyra raised her pistol and stepped forward, her movements cautious but determined, and I followed close behind. The chamber was a cathedral of broken machinery. The vast cylindrical housing of the plasma core throbbed irregularly, its once steady glow now flickering with sickly green veins that pulsed along the conduits like invasive blood vessels. Chunks of metal hung suspended in midair as if caught in a gravity well, rotating slowly in impossible patterns. The tech priests lay scattered across the floor in contorted heaps, their red robes stained with streaks of blackened ichor that steamed gently in the cold air. Their mycodendrites twitched weakly, as though their machine spirits were trying to retreat from whatever horror had overtaken their flesh. Lyra scanned the room, then stiffened. There, by the core. I turned and froze. One of the magos stood upright, or what remained of him. His lower body had fused into the deck, tendrils of metal and bone braiding together like roots anchoring him in place. The upper half of his torso stretched unnaturally tall, elongated by sinew, warped flesh that clung to exposed circuitry. His head had split along the cranial seams, revealing an inner lattice of glowing runes that pulsed in time with the nightmare's heartbeat. His vox grill crackled. A low, trembling whisper rose from it. "Mother," rising. Lyra fired instantly. 3 coherent beams slamming into the Magus's skull, but the energy dissipated across his contorted form as though absorbed into liquid. His head twitched toward me, the glowing lattice brightening. His next words were not spoken aloud. They were pressed directly into my thoughts. "You are the first thing it recognized." I stumbled backward, nausea coiling through my gut. Lyra caught my arm, hauling me away from the fused creature. "Don't look at it, Elan. Stay with me." Her voice sharpened, commanding. "Where's the manual, Det?" A thunderous pulse shook the chamber, the core flaring with blinding light. The blast wave knocked us both to the ground. The suspended debris crashed down around us, clattering against the deck. The Magos's body split apart in a silent, wet rupture, dissolving into a fine mist that evaporated before it reached the floor. Lyra pushed herself up, coughing. "We're out of time, the core's going critical." She reached the control dais, slamming her fist against the emergency override. Sparks burst from the console, but the display flickered alive, barely functional. "Elan, help me force the sequence." I reached the panel beside her and pressed my palms against the activation sigils, feeling the hum of the plasma core vibrating through the controls like a heartbeat struggling to maintain its rhythm. The override lights flickered red, then amber, then steadied on a dim, trembling white. The detonation countdown began. Lyra turned to me, eyes hidden beneath her visor, voice low and resolute. "We run, now." But before we could take a single step, the newborn nightmare whispered inside my skull with chilling and rand. "Clarity. You cannot leave me." The chamber walls bulged inward. The countdown ticked on. Lyra seized my wrist and pulled me into a sprint. The moment the detonation sequence began, the glory of dawn seemed to realize it was dying. The deck vibrated beneath our boots in panicked pulses, as though the ship's metal bones were struggling to decide whether to snap apart or bend toward the newborn presence still whispering through the bulkheads. Lyra kept her grip locked around my wrist, dragging me through the twisting service tunnels as alarms sputtered overhead, not sirens, but strangled bursts of broken vox tones warping in and out of existence. The air thickened with heat and warp pressure, each breath coming with the metallic tang of ionized plasma mixed with the sickly sweetness of decaying organic matter. The creature's awareness pressed against my thoughts in slow, intimate waves, more curious now than predatory, as though trying to memorize the rhythm of my fear. We reached the corridor leading to the escape coffin bay, only to find the passage distorting in long, rippling waves. The deck beneath us tilted and straightened with each step, as though the ship no longer remembered the concept of horizontal space. Lyra pushed through it with brute strength and discipline, her steady presence the last tether keeping me grounded. Shadows flickered across the walls, not cast by any light source, but drifting independently, moving with a lag that made my vision blur whenever I blinked. The hum of the plasma core intensified behind us, growing higher and thinner, as if the heart of the ship were stretching toward a final, screaming threshold. Lyra shoved open a bulkhead door and forced me inside. The coffin bay was dim rows of reinforced escape sarcophagi hanging like metal cocoons from suspension arms. Half of them flickered with unstable power. Others hummed quietly, ready for launch. But some had begun to warp, their surfaces twisting like reflective, fluid bending inward. The newborn nightmare's influence seeped into the chamber, creating distortions along the floor that rippled away from my footsteps like water disturbed by something beneath its surface. Lyra tested one of the coffins manually, slamming her fist against the activation panel until the lid hissed open. A faint glow washed over us, a sterile blue lumen, blessed and shielded, one of the last untouched pockets of real space on the dying vessel. She turned toward me, her visor catching the faint gleam. "In," she said. "Now." I didn't move. not because I wanted to die, because the newborn creature's whisper slid through my mind with a softness that made my breath tremble. "You cannot go." A pressure built behind my eyes, not painful but persuasive, like a hand resting gently at the base of my skull. Images flickered at fractured futures, strangled timelines, reflections of myself drifting through endless variations of this moment. In each one, I saw the creature learning, adapting, stretching its awareness across the fabric of our dying ship. In each version, Lyra didn't survive. My breath caught. Lyra stepped closer, gripping my jaw with her gauntlet and forcing my gaze toward her visor. "Elon, look at me, not at whatever it's showing you. Look at me." The pressure in my skull tightened. The creature didn't like being ignored. My vision flickered. Lyra doubled, then split, then returned. I forced air into my lungs, anchoring myself to the sound of her breath inside the visor. "I can't leave you," I whispered. Lyra didn't hesitate. She shoved me backward with both hands, slamming me into the coffin's interior hard enough to knock the air from my chest. Before I could recover, she hit the seal control, and the lid began to slide shut, locking me inside the cold, narrow confines of the escape sarcophagus. Through the narrowing gap, I saw her silhouette small, armored, impossibly brave, contrasted against the trembling green glow consuming the bay. The ship groaned again as the plasma core reached its critical peak, the countdown echoing faintly through the hull. Lyra reached toward the coffin, her fingers brushing the edge of the closing lid. "I promised I'd keep you alive," she said softly. The final inch began to close. The last thing I heard was her voice, not trembling, not desperate, but resolute in the way only true devotion can be. Live enough for both of us. The coffin sealed, and everything went dark. Inside the escape coffin, the darkness did not feel like absence. It felt occupied, as though something unseen shared the cramped capsule with me, its presence lingering in the recycled air, brushing against my thoughts with patient curiosity. The sarcophagus hummed around me, its machine spirit struggling to interpret the dying command protocols as the glory of dawn groaned through the final stages of its collapse. I could hear the plasma core through the saying, hull, its rising whine turning brittle, thinning into the high-pitched shriek of a reactor stretched past every safety threshold. Lyra's voice echoed in my memory with painful clarity, burning hotter than the warp distortion pressing through the metal beyond. "Live enough for both of us." The words felt too heavy, too large for the tiny space I had been locked into. The coffin's inertial dampeners flickered, sending a ripple of vertigo through my stomach as the ship's gravity faltered completely. For a moment, I floated inside the suspension harness, pressed weightless against the padded interior, while the capsule adjusted calibration with hittering tremors. My breath fogged the inside of the visor-mounted lumen as cold seeped in through the seams, the temperature dropping enough that every inhale felt sharp and crystalline. I tried to steady myself, tried to slow the ragged rhythm of my breathing, but the newborn nightmare pushed into the edges of my awareness again, sliding across my thoughts like a fingertip smearing wet ink. "Do not leave," it whispered, not as sound, but as an intrusive certainty shifting behind my consciousness. Images flickered across my mind in short, disjointed bursts. In one, the ship remained intact, the corridors empty, Lyra standing before me with a hand extended. In another, the plasma core had already detonated, and the creature floated unharmed through the expanding cloud of molten wreckage, curious and unbound by physics. In a third, I saw myself not inside the coffin at all, but standing beside the nightmare as if waiting for instruction. Each vision felt like a question it wanted answered, a puzzle it needed to test against the shape of my fear. The coffin jerked violently to starboard as another explosion tore through the ship, this one close, ripping through the deck with a metallic scream that reverberated through the entire capsule. Emergency rooms flickered to life in front of me, stuttering warnings that overlapped into a chaotic stream. Decompression imminent. Structural failure critical. Reactor, cascade, seconds remaining. I forced my hands against the restraints, muscles trembling, desperate to hear something, anything from outside. But the bay was silent now. No footsteps, no gunfire, no voice shouting my name. No Lyra. The pressure in my skull tightened again, more insistent this time. The creature wanted something, wanted me. A cold wave rippled through my mind, peeling away protections I didn't know I'd built, seeking a place to anchor itself. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached, squeezing my eyes shut, trying to remember Lyra's hand on my shoulder, her voice in the corridor, the way she always positioned herself between me and danger without hesitation. The nightmare's whisper faltered, its presence dimming slightly as I focused on her. It did not understand that kind of resolve, that kind of devotion, but it recognized the barrier it created. A thunderous blast shook the coffin, then another, a chain reaction tearing through the ship's collapsing spine. The countdown must have reached 0. I felt the sarcophagus lurch as the bay restraints disengaged. A sudden acceleration pressed me brutally into the chair as the escape coffin launched into the void, the catapult arms firing one last time before the bay vaporized behind me in a wave of incandescent death. The darkness outside shifted. Stars stretched into thin lines, then snapped back as the coffin cleared the debris field. The hull rattled with the shockwaves of the ship's destruction, vibrating with a deep, hollow resonance that echoed through the capsule like the sigh of a dying giant. The pressure in my skull loosened at last. The creature's presence thinned, then fell away entirely as real space swallowed the fleeing coffin. Only then did I realize the truth. The nightmare hadn't stopped reaching for me. It had simply learned to wait. The silence that followed the ship's death was not relief. It was a wound wide, cold, and infinitely deep. The escape coffin drifted through the void, with only the soft, mechanical respiration of its life support hissing into my ears. My hands trembled against the restraints, muscles twitching with the memory of Lyra's grip dragging me towards survival, forcing breath into lungs that wanted to surrender. The suspension harness tightened around my chest as the coffin stabilized its rotation, sealing me in a cradle of metal and stale air. Every part of the ship that had ever known me was gone now, its corridors, its vaults, its sanctum, and somewhere within that implosion lay what remained of her. I didn't cry. The Imperium doesn't teach us how. Instead, I closed my eyes and listened to the coffin's quiet hum, the faint static of the damaged vox, the distant rattle of debris pinging against the hull. I waited for the nightmare's voice to seep into the silence, to press against the inner walls of my mind the way it had aboard the Glory of Dawn. But only a faint echo lingered like a presence standing on the far side of a closed door, listening to my breathing through the cracks. When I finally dared to activate the external picked feed, the void screen flickered to life, showing the starfield beyond. But the stars... something was wrong. Thin trails of distortion ran between them like fading scars across the fabric of real space. I watched one of the brighter points flicker bright, dim, bright again like a dying ember in a forge. The warp's touch had reached farther than the ship. The creature's birth had rippled outward, leaving bruises on the void itself. The coffin's machine spirit offered a quiet query in Binhuric destination unknown. Time to rescue negligibly. Oxygen supply limited. I acknowledged the message with a press of my thumb against the interior rune plate. It retracted the query without comfort or reassurance. Machine spirits do not lie. They simply wait for you to accept the truth. My gaze drifted to the cracked interior reflection in the visor glass. I barely recognized the man staring back, pale, sunken, eyes ringed with exhaustion and something darker. The nightmare had looked at me, learned me, pressed against my thoughts with a curiosity no Daemon ever possessed. It had not spoken again since the coffin launched, but its absence felt heavy, intentional. It had simply stepped away, leaving the impression that it understood waiting far better than we understood fleeing. Lyra's final words echoed through my skull, clearer than any Vox transmission, live enough for both of us. I replayed them until my throat tightened. She had chosen to stay behind, not out of fear, not out of resignation, but out of instinctive devotion to the one thing she had sworn to protect. She saved me because she believed someone had to remember. The Imperium would never know her sacrifice. They would record the glory of dawn as lost to the warp, chalk the casualty list to unexpected anomaly, and move on without looking back. But I remembered. I would always remember. The coffin's emergency recorder chimed with a soft tone, awaiting my testimony. It would continue transmitting until the power cells died, casting my confession into whatever listening void might exist around me. I hesitated, breath trembling, then activated the recorder. A lumen flickered on, illuminating the cramped chamber in a faint, sterile glow. I spoke slowly, the words scraping their way out of a throat raw from silence. I told the machine spirit everything. About Ceres, about the cocoon, about the newborn thing that learned the shape of my thoughts, about the ship it consumed from the inside out, about the moment Lyra sealed the coffin and stepped back into the collapsing corridor without hesitation, without fear, without regret. I spoke until my voice cracked, until my breath quivered, until the weight of the truth settled into the cold metal around me like a final companion. And when I had nothing left to confess, I ended the recording. The lumen dimmed, the void waited, and in the quiet, I surrendered the last truth I still carried. I lived because she chose to die, and I will forever drown in the memory of her sacrifice.